So my name is Josh Denablo. I'm the manager here at Legacy, and today we're going to go over the proposed amendments to the covenants. So I figure the best format for this is I'll go over each one at a time, and then I'll open it up for questions on that specific amendment. And then when we're done with the questions, we'll move on to the next one. And then at the end, if there's some new questions or anything that we didn't cover that everyone wants to discuss, we can go ahead and do that. So we have a total of 6 changes that are being proposed, and all of them have one thing in common. They require 667 yes votes for any of them to pass. So we have 999 residents. That means a majority of the people are going to have to not only vote, but vote yes. So the first one that I want to go over is the proposed amendment to change the amount of votes to approve one of these. And that's section 10.1. So like I said, currently your documents state that you have to have 2/3 of the members approve any amendment to the document. That's 667 yes votes. What the board is wanting to do is lower that down to 50% plus 1. So a majority of the homeowners in Legacy. That would be 500 votes. The reason this had been talked about in the past and Legacy actually voted on it was the thought was if we can get this one passed, it might make it easier to get the other ones passed. We didn't get enough votes to do it last time, so we're hoping that this time while we're voting, we will be able to get enough votes. So again, any change for this vote will need 667 yes votes. If amendment to section 10.1 passes, any future proposed amendments will be at 50% plus 1, so 500 votes. What you see up there is exactly what's in the document. It just changes it from 2/3 to 50% plus 1. So does anybody have any questions about this one? Well, this is going to be easy. Okay.
Josh, if we could say a few things about it, some board members, or
If you have a comment or something, yeah, go for it. Somebody get him a microphone.
Behind. They got microphones here. Yeah, you do. We got people who can't hear. Like me.
So, I'm one of the board members. My name is Frank. So, one of the reasons we want this, and one of the reasons I hear people say, this isn't a good idea, we never want just a simple majority to make big, changes here. Nefarious people could take over, And I gotta kind of smirk at that, because one of the biggest things we've been trying to do for years here in Legacy is renovate these buildings. That could be, I don't know how much that's gonna cost, but let's just throw out a number that's over what we project. Let's say it's $2 million. That takes a simple majority. It's the biggest thing we're doing for years and years, and that's a simple majority. So when you think that historically, like Dr. Phil says, the best indication of future events is past practice. The most I think we've ever had vote here is roughly around 700. So to want 501 people to vote yes, when we're probably not ever going to get more than 700 people voting, that comes up to like 71%, which is really that's a decent, healthy amount. So the argument of the majority, 501 is way too low, doesn't really make sense in light of how many people historically vote. And a no, or a person that doesn't vote is voting no. And that's why it's an uphill battle to get a lot of important things done here. It's crazy that we could spend $2 million to renovate a building with only 501 votes, but to fix a pothole in the conservation area trail, it takes 667 votes. How ridiculous is that? So anyway, thank you.
No, I haven't.
I have a question.
Question.
Are these all going to be simultaneously voted on?
So each one will be, you'll vote on all of them at the same time, but each one will be voted and counted separately. So when you go through and you vote, you'll mark yes or no for each amendment, and there's 6 of them total.
So if this one passes, say, it won't affect the other ones?
Correct. So if it passes on this one, it will not, all of them will need 667 votes.
And please keep in mind, if you do not vote, it's a no vote.
That's correct.
People have to vote.
Is there any chance that's the reason why you don't get 999 people to vote? Is because they're voting no.
Can I, yeah, I can answer
By
that.
not voting, that's a no.
Yeah,
By not
Just-
voting, that's a no.
yeah, it is, but one thing I will say, and this is something I learned the first time I was on the board when I asked these questions. Historically, HOAs, if they get 35% of the people to vote, that's a lot. We have been extremely lucky that we usually get at least 500 people to vote. The last time we tried to do this, we actually had 719 people vote. 559 voted yes. But we got the largest vote out ever, which is just unheard of in an HOA. The people that don't vote usually don't pay attention, or they're not involved, and some of my neighbors are like that. So it's not necessarily, yeah, it is a no vote, but they just don't pay attention. They don't pay attention to anything that goes on. They don't look at Channel 16 ever. They don't look at Legacy Neighbors. They don't get a newspaper. So this is what we're trying to do, is get the word out, and so people will talk to the neighbors and say, hey, have you voted yet? And you can vote no, and that's fine. That lets us know. But that's what we're trying to do, is get some things done. Fortunately, here at Legacy, we have had a very, very good turnout. Very difficult to get 667 yes votes, but we've had a pretty good turnout here. We're just trying to get those last 280 people to do something besides just sit at home.
Chris?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm John Prezioso. I happen to be one of the block captains with Neighbor to Neighbor. What I plan on doing after this meeting is done is I'm knocking on all their doors and asking them to vote. And I'll knock on some other block captains' doors as well, just to see if we can't push people to stand up and don't let apathy rule. That's not right in a community where you live and you benefit by these changes that are made by the board. Thank you.
Right here. Right here.
I'm Elaine Leach. I've been thinking about this. Of course, I'm for everything. I've lived here almost 20 years. One thing that I thought about, we walk a lot. I know 3 houses in our part that we walk. The people aren't living there. They're old. They're in like nursing homes. They might have died by now. The kids are cleaning out the house. So we're in the process of that. So to me, I'm thinking, I know 3 houses just in our block that's going to be,
Hold your microphone up.
that's going to be, you know, considered a no vote because they aren't going to vote. And the other thing that concerns me are landlords. They're not going to want this because it's going to change their rental value a little bit. So, and first I thought, well, that's the 50+1 isn't going to matter to them, but it will because it'd be harder to get the rental information, the rental changes made with the 66% or whatever it is, as opposed to the 50.1. So that's just, these are just things that I'm thinking negatively, which shouldn't be thinking negatively.
Hi, I'm Diane Stanley, and I'm on the board of directors as well. And I've heard so many times through the 4 years that I've been in this community, the board of directors doesn't get anything done. We can't get anything done if our hands are tied. This covenant, this amendment in particular, ties the board's hands. This is not about spending. This is about our ability to manage our community. 25 years ago, things were completely different. And at the time, this document was a really good document. It's like our Constitution. We've made amendments to our Constitution because we had to over time. If we don't adapt, we are not going to be able to compete with other communities in this area. So if you hear people saying the board doesn't get anything done, ask them if they voted. Ask them if they plan to vote. Because this is critically important that we get this specific one changed. If we can't get this one changed, how are we going to be able to manage things into the future? We cannot get 667 votes without people going, please, please vote. Walk around, get people to vote, because 50 plus 1 is hard to get yes votes. 667, it's a tough goal. But if we can't get this one done, how do we manage this community in the future? That's how you have to ask yourself. And I've heard people over and over tell me, I don't want to get involved. I'm retired. Not getting involved does not move this community forward. Okay? I'm not asking them to sit on a committee, not asking you to get involved in the board. I'm asking you to cast a vote. Have your neighbors cast a vote. This is not about spending. This is about managing our community and moving us forward, allowing us to be competitive. If you want us to be competitive with other communities at some point in time, you want your property sold, we need this change. All right? So get out and vote. All right?
Hey, Josh. Piggybacking off that comment, right now, if we need 677 votes. Simple math says it's 67, almost 68%. If you reduce the threshold, you have to take into account the apathetic vote. So if, let's just say 300 people don't vote, you're only dealing with a population of around 700 people. And you would need 72% of those people to approve things. So actually, by reducing the threshold, you're making it a little harder to get something done. But they're the people who are most involved in getting things done. What we're doing is giving too much power to the 300 or so people that don't vote. And that really is not fair to the people who want to see change. So, you know, numbers are very important here. It won't be a slam dunk at 50 plus 1, but it will be more achievable. And we may be able to get things done. That's it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Does anybody else have anything?
Hi, I'm Gary Smisney. One of the things I've heard people tell me is, I'm going to die here, I don't care. No, well, people think that. What if that's not true? All these covenant changes affect your property values. And if, just by the odd chance that you might have to move out, you might have to go to Waterman, you might have to go back north with family, you might have to do something. Don't you want to get every dime out of your property that you can? So, with people that say, the answer is no, what's the question? They have to think about that. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, let's move on to insurance. So section 3.9 of your documents covers the insurance and what requirements the community has for insurance. It outlines that we have to have hazard, comprehensive general liability, and fidelity insurance for anybody that's involved with handling money. One section in there, it covers the deductibles. And right now it has a max deductible of $2,500, which we're able to do for a majority of the insurance. But there are certain things like named storm or lightning where they charge a higher amount because the risk is greater. So while we were in here cleaning up the documents, it was recommended that we take that section out of the declaration and just leave it blank because it's already covered in the documents what we're required to have. So having a limit on it doesn't make sense, especially since getting a policy for certain risks, you can't get a deductible that low. So this is a pretty straightforward change. The one thing I will point out too is our deductible, the community has a restricted fund that covers what you might have to spend in a year on deductible. Right now, that fund is at $60,000. So if there was a named storm or any catastrophic event where we had to make a claim, you have the money set aside in there for that. Does anybody have any questions about this particular change? All right. Any comment? No. All right, let's move on to the trails. So this has been called the Trails Amendment, but it really has to do with all the conservation easements. When the documents were created, they basically took a copy of the conservation easement contract with St. John's, took a portion of the restrictions off of there, and put it into your documents. If you look at the contract between the developer and St. John's, you'll see all the things you can't do, but there's about 2 pages of that were omitted out of your documents where it says the process of what you can do and how to get approval. So in your documents, it basically says you can't do that, but in the conservation contract, it says that you can, subject to their approval, and it lays out how that can be done. So in order for some of the improvements or maintenance projects that the community wants to do in the conservation area, we would want to have that language removed from the covenants and then just have it simply say subject to St. John's approval. So anything that's done in the conservation easement needs St. John's approval. Doesn't matter if it's a trail improvement, doesn't matter if it's invasive removals, anything. You know, currently we communicate with them for plans to maintain the areas for like invasives, or if we want to plant native plants in there, we'd have to get that approved. But before we can do that, we'd have to have that removed from the documents and something simply saying subject to St. John's approval.
I'm sorry, I didn't identify myself earlier, Chris, about board of directors. And just so you know, this, all we have to do is get written permission from St. John's, and they are okay with this. We have talked to them, they said that's all you need. So just so everybody understands that.
That's not an easy task.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, and if you look at the slide up above, you can see what the restrictions are. And that is taken basically from the contract agreement. If anybody wanted to see the contract, it's on the Legacy Neighbors website, but I can also print out a copy for you so you can review what our agreement with them actually is. Any other comments? All right. So the fun one, rental restrictions. All right, so this is broken down into 2 separate changes. And the reason this is in two separate changes is in July of 2021, Florida state legislature passed a law saying that you can't create a no rental rule in your community and have it affect current owners. So if you own a home in an HOA and the board or the community passes a rule that says there's no new rentals or you can't rent a home, that only applies to people that buy after that date. So basically, the only restrictions you can put on current homeowners is 6 months. You have a minimum lease of 6 months or the 3 times in a year. So we'll go over the first one, the 6 month. Basically, if this amendment passes, all the current homeowners in Legacy would have a minimum 6 month lease, and they would only be able to rent the home a max of 3 times in a year. And I've had a lot of people ask me, well, how can you rent a home 3 times in a year if it's a 6 month minimum lease? Well, there's always situations where the tenants break the lease, or they have a mutual agreement and they decide to go their separate ways. This prevents them from doing it more than 3 times. And where that language came from was actually out of 720. If you read 720, it actually says in there 6 months or a limit of 3 tenants per year. So the attorney's basically taking that and putting it into our documents, and that's why it's read that way. So the next change would be the no new rentals. And what that would mean, again, is if you already own a home here in Legacy, you have the right to rent your home. If the First Amendment passes, it would be for a minimum of 6 months. If that doesn't pass, and let's say the no new rentals does pass, then you would be able to rent your home for any amount of time. But anybody taking ownership after that amendment passes and is recorded, they would not be able to rent their home, period. The other thing that has been brought up about this is, well, what happens if I add my son to the contract? Or what happens if I get remarried and I want to put them on there, or I want to put it in a trust or an estate? Well, 720 actually covers that, and it talks about as long as, basically to sum it up, if as long as you are still an owner of the property, then you're covered. There's specific, Ralph, if you go back to that, there's specific language in there that talks about affiliated entities, and it kind of goes into detail, but I'm not going to try and cover that because I'm not an attorney. But if you have specific questions, I can print that out for you, and you can talk to an estate planner or somebody like that and make sure your specific situation is okay. But basically it comes down to, if you maintain ownership, you still retain the right to rent the property out. All right, so let's see if anybody has questions about this, the first one, the 6 months, 3 times in a year. Does anybody have any questions about that? Drew, right there.
My name is Gary. I have a statement I'd like to read based on conversations with the CAM, the video, the YouTube that's out there, etc. Per the CAM, Legacy has no corporate-owned properties. Per the November board meeting, we have no investor issues. Per the CAM, Legacy currently has just 24 rented houses, 2.4% of all properties, the majority of which have 1-year leases. The number of rentals has remained steady for years. As to number 1, corporate-owned properties, the nation's 2 largest corporate residential property owners, Progress Residential and Invitation Homes, own 155,000 homes nationwide, with Florida being one of their major markets. Yet currently, they have just 5 homes available for rent in Leesburg, none of which are located in a 55-plus community. In Frank's online posting regarding the proposed change, he mentions potential problems with Airbnb and VRBO. Per Airbnb and VRBO websites, the current average number of nights per stay are 4.3 nights in an Airbnb and 7.5 nights in a VRBO. Our current 30-day minimum should continue to be enough of a deterrent for any potential buyer to look elsewhere for a short-term rental property. As to number 2, per the CAM, we have had issues with tenants in the past, but currently there are no major issues, only a small number of violations for weeds, yard maintenance, political flags, etc. There's very little evidence of neglect or disregard for our homeowners' restrictions by landlords or tenants. Turnover remains consistent in the 8 to 10% range, with less than 2% rentals and no associated unusual costs on the CAM. Per the CAM, Leland Property manages over 400 developments, and almost all have rentals available. Highland Lakes next door has a 30-day minimum. Royal Highlands has a 3-month minimum. Royal Harbor has no minimum. Frank also referred to issues he sees in the villages. What he fails to mention is that the villages has no rental restrictions. They in fact include in their sales approach to potential buyers as a positive. Buy now, rent it out, move in down the road when you're retired. The villages does have a good number of rental properties, including short-term Airbnb and VRBO. Yet their property values have consistently been higher than any other 55 plus in the area. Personally, I and others like me have an issue with the proposed change to the 6-month minimum. As a Florida homestead resident, I have to occupy my home for 6 months and 1 day in order to maintain my homestead status. I typically stay in Florida for closer to 7 months, then go north for the summer. The proposed 6-month lease requirement would preclude me from being able to rent my legacy home during my time up north. To summarize, and now it's my personal opinion, I don't believe Legacy has an issue with rentals, either landlords or tenants. Our current 30-day minimum is sufficient to deter short-term rentals. The frenzy of buying with properties selling sight unseen at thousands of dollars above listing is over. In fact, of the last 10 homes that have sold in Legacy, the average time on market was over 76 days and sold for an average of $21,000 below list price. Of the 21 homes currently listed for sale in Legacy, now averaging 45 days on the market, only 2 have pending sales. Changing our rental policy to no new buyers able to rent just might stop a buyer from considering Legacy.
Thanks, Gary.
Bill Leach, 5364 Aurora Drive. Gary, thank you for all your statistics, and they're all great, except that I happen to have a renter living next door to me. It's been that way for a while. They have no interest whatsoever in taking care of their yard, and nor does the owner. So I personally don't want this. I want to go ahead with the new change. I don't like the renters. Thank you.
Tell the camp. Have you told the camp? Yes. And what do they do? Nothing. What can they do? What can they do? All right. The next thing? It's enough.
So, since I was mentioned twice by name, I'll respond. And
Well, no, you're the one that put it out there.
yes, because I was asked to by the board, because I serve the board. I serve the whole Legacy. So I respect your opinion, and we differ, and that's fine. This is America. And I will dispute a few things, though. Yes, you are correct that the number of rentals that we have officially, the CAM says is like 21. We all know and have been told by other residents that we have more than that, because not every landlord has done all the things necessary that they're supposed to do. You're supposed to have a copy of the lease given to the CAM and all these other things that they have to do, and a lot of landlords don't do it. In regards to problems, we have had problems that haven't been addressed by official letters. I constantly have residents in Legacy coming up to us and saying, we have this problem, we have this problem, we have this problem. And we hear it all the time. I believe that property values do go up when it's a non-rental community. In regards to what you said about Verbo, statistics are fine. But as a person that owned rental property here in Florida, I rented my house every year for 6 or a 3-month minimum when I had the house in the plantation. I used Verbo. I had well over 100 people beg for that house during the golden 3 months of January, February, March. My goal was, when I was a landlord, is I knew I could rent for 3 months, no problem, over 100 applications. So I was looking for the ones that were a little bit more because it was more money in my pocket. So a lot of landlords that rent during the snowbird season use Verbo, and I did, so I could personally attest to that. I think people that are renters, they're not as engaged in the community. They don't seem to often go along with the HOA rules. I mean, we have problems with HOA rule compliance, even with residents, believe me. How much more with renters when they don't have any personal skin in the game. So I think it's a positive to limit the rentals. The nice thing is that you have the best of both worlds. Every single person that lives here now, that owns now, you can rent your house till the day you die. The new ones, if both pass, and I hope they do, they will buy knowing that they can't. And I perceive that as a good thing, and from judging by all the residents who have come up to myself and other board members saying that they are passionate about this, they want to see this, they want to see something done about renters, I think it's a positive thing, so. But we could agree to disagree agreeably.
We have a CAM now that if we have issues now, why aren't they being addressed now with the renters that are here now?
The CAM could only do so much, and if they don't know a house is rented because the landlord was not compliant by giving them a lease and all that, how are they supposed to know? It's like,
Well, whether it's leased or not, the only thing we see is the outside of the house. What difference does it make whether it's leased or not, as far as saying, oh, that yard is bad, or you send letters out when driveways aren't clean enough. I don't understand why there's an issue with it being a tenant or a non-tenant or an owner.
we'll just agree to disagree agreeably. So, and I appreciate you showing that your intent on being against this is because you would like to rent less than 6 months because you'd like to maintain your residency here and still rent for those remaining 5 months. So I do understand the reasoning
Maybe 3
before.
months, and I'm happy.
Yeah. So, okay, thank you.
I don't know Gary, but I agree with some of the things he said, because I too live here 7 months approximately, and I live up north 5 months. I'm a resident here. If I wanted to rent out my home for a couple months in the summer to a good friend or neighbor, because I would not just rent to anybody, I wouldn't want somebody in my house that I didn't really trust. But say somebody wanted to come down with their family that I knew and stay and go to Disney and visit relatives and go to the beach and do some fun things in the summer. It's nice here in the summer. I don't think it's terrible all the time like some people do. I would like to be able to do that, have that ability, especially if there was a reason I couldn't come down. If there was a reason I couldn't come because of health issue or surgery, or my husband couldn't come down, we might not be able to come, but we want to maintain our residence. We have to be here 6 months and a day. Well, there are costs involved in maintaining homes. And so, if you could rent for a very short time to someone, that would be very helpful with the costs that you have. I also do not agree with the two, I'll call it caste system, the people who can rent and the people who can't. I think that opens up a whole can of worms. I think the rules should be the same for everyone. Okay, so I bought a house yesterday, and now I'll be able to rent my home, but you buy one tomorrow, and you no longer can rent ever. That just seems so unfair to me. It seems like a system I would not want to be part of. And in terms of taking care of rental properties, we have a very good CAM, and the responsibility is really with the owner. So if there is a problem with a renter, the owner needs to be told that there's a problem, and the owner needs to take care of it. We do get letters for various things, and so that can happen. So I'm trusting in our system, but I would like not to have either one of those voted yes. So I'm a no voter on both. Thank you.
Just one thing I would explain about the first is, as Josh explained about the first way, where you 6 months and 3 times a year. The lease is between you and whoever the renter is. So, if you only want to rent it for 5 months, that's between you and who you're renting to. If you break by a mutual agreement the lease that's less than 6 months, you sign the 6-month lease, but if you break it after 2 or 3 months, that's between you, the person who owns and the renter, and that's understood. That's something we don't want to get involved in. So yes, you can rent your house for, yes, you'd have to write a 6-month lease, but it could be for less. That's why it's written like it is, the very first way. There could be a maximum of 3 times a year. If you're gone for 5 months, you get somebody to sign a 6-month lease, they leave after 2 months, okay, that's a mutual agreement, that lease is finished. You can do it again for another 2 or 3 months. But you can do a maximum of 3 times a year, and that was the way it was explained.
I'm sorry. Oh, so you still could. Okay, so we've kind of also broached the subject of the new owner couldn't rent the house. My concern is my daughter lives up in Canada. When my wife and I pass away, she would inherit this house as the new owner and unable to rent the property. So her only option at that point is to sell, not create an income stream for herself, but to simply sell that property. I'm a no vote on that part of it, only because I want to leave that option up to her decision. And that's just what I got to say.
What if you put
So,
her on,
right.
what if you put her on the deed now?
What if I don't want to do that? That creates a big problem.
So I will point out, I'm not an estate planner or an attorney, but if you read paragraph 4 of the 720 display up there, it does cover affiliated entities, and one of them is heirs. So let's see here. When an heir becomes the parcel owner. So it is covered under that.
Thank you.
Not saying that solves your problem, you might want to check on that.
Good job.
Does anybody else have any questions, comments?
At Metcalf on Stony Brook, I get a phone call probably twice a month. Someone wants to buy my house. I tell them specifically, take me off your call list. I am not interested. It's not a real estate person. It's probably someone who wants to turn around and rent it.
And a couple of emails.
Any other comments? Okay, so we're going to move on to the emergency radio antennas. So section 516 covers outdoor antennas. And this was brought to us by the document ad hoc committee when they were reviewing the rules. They pointed out that there are a few ham radio operators who would like to be able to establish communications with the Lake County Emergency Services. And in order for them to do that, they would need the antennas to be able to reach them. And so the board had talked about this and discussed this with the different operators, and what they basically want to do is take out the section about the antennas and allow the board to create rules around having antennas put in. One of them would be they can approve up to 3 radio ham. These are sample rules. These rules have not been created. All the changes is that they're removing the line that says that you can't have antennas and stating that you can have them subject to board approval. And then the board basically could create restrictions. They could say that there's a limited height on them. They could say that it's up to 3. You have to be a ham operator to be able to have the antenna. And then they can also create different rules around aesthetics to make sure that it doesn't impact neighboring properties. And the reason the restrictions or the rules aren't put into the document change in the covenants is because that's probably not the best place for that. You know, that would be better off in your architectural guidelines or your rules and restrictions, or even in your bylaws, somewhere where the board can control it. Because if you put it in your covenants, then it requires the community to approve any changes like we're trying to do now. So does anybody have questions about that or concerns?
I'd like to say something.
Sure. Yeah. Brian.
Okay, so I'm part of Neighbor's Neighbor, and we've been trying to work on getting these emergency communications well established in case we do get hit by inclement, horrible weather, and we need to be able to reach the outside world. We have a direct connection straight to Lake County Emergency Operations Center via ham radio if we can talk to them. If the power goes out, cell towers go down, landlines are down because the power poles are down or whatever, we could be stuck here wishing we could actually get some help for ourselves by allowing these antennas, and by the way, the antenna is about the width of a pencil. They're very, very thin, pretty much invisible from a very short distance away from them. And the thought is it would be kind of like a flagpole type of scenario. Flagpole height restriction on how high that can be, and an antenna that you can't even see from the street, really. So we really feel strongly that this is needed by our community. You know, preparedness is what it's all about, and you have to be able to count upon those communications should the need arise for ourselves. So I would please ask everyone to very strongly consider voting yes on this one for sure, no matter what your feeling is on the others. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you guys haven't seen the video that Larry Crook and Mary Kay put together, Larry actually has an antenna that you can see in the video, and that's on the website and on the YouTube channel, and it really isn't that big of an antenna. And yeah, John, go ahead.
Okay, of the last 20 years or so, the 35 or so communities that I've managed in Florida, almost all of the covenants read that no antenna may be installed without prior approval from the Architectural Control Board. Would that not be easier to have that wording in our covenants rather than what we're trying to do here, and just leave it to the Architectural Control Board to approve or disapprove with a standard appeal process to the board?
Well, basically, you're doing that. It's just not written that way. You're saying subject to board approval and restrictions created by the board. So one of those could be that that's deferred to the architectural committee for approval with the following guidelines added to the ARC guidelines. So you're essentially doing that. You just have to change the document first to allow that. Does that make sense? So instead of putting in there that it's ARC approving it, you're putting in there that it's subject to board approval.
Unfortunately, that still leaves another level of complication in it. I'm trying to make it as easy as possible for these people that neighbor to neighbor to get communications to the emergency centers when we need them.
Understood, and I get what you're saying. But the board, when this was put together, they felt it was best to have the board create those guidelines, and that's the way they drafted it.
Understood. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, we're 100% behind the board's 100% behind the areas. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Sorry.
Just fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll go over real quickly the voting process and what you can expect in the next couple weeks. So again, each one of these amendments, there's 6 of them, they'll be voted on separately. They all need 667 yes votes to pass. You'll be receiving ballots along with your annual meeting director election ballots from the inspectors of the election. That's our voting company. You probably have already seen notices of the annual meeting coming up. And they'll be sending basically 2 different types of ballots. You'll have one for the election of directors, and then you'll have one for all the different amendments that are being discussed here today. And you'll vote on all of that, and then on March 5th at 11 o'clock we'll have the annual meeting, and then we'll also have a separate meeting to announce the results of the voting. So if you have not signed up to vote electronically, come see me. We'll make sure we get you set up for that, so that way you get your ballot by email. If not, they'll be mailed to your address of record, and you should see them around February 1st. So do we have any other general questions or comments? Ed?
How, if at all, will we reach the approximately 300 homeowners that typically don't vote because they're not tuned in? I heard John say he's going to go out and knock on doors. Is there any other way?
And just to be clear, that's not allowed, but. So if I get a letter, or I get a phone call, somebody's getting a letter.
And I'm still going to do it. Yeah. I would not agree that it's not allowed. I think that's wrong. But that's not my point. My point is is there a plan, and if so, what is it, on how we're gonna reach the 300 homeowners who typically don't vote because they're not tuned in?
So I feel like that might be a better question for the board to answer, because I take my direction from them, but I do feel like when you compare this to the last couple attempts that we've had a little bit more constant emailing, we've had videos that have been put together, there's been a lot of information out there about this. There's a dedicated webpage on the site. I've spoken to several homeowners, questions, concerns, comments. So I think there is a lot of people that are engaged and are aware of this, but the honest answer is you're not going to get everybody. The fact that you have as many people as you do is not normal. I mean, like Chris was saying earlier, when you compare it to other HOAs, I mean, even Arlington Ridge, when they do their annual meeting, they barely make quorum. And you guys are going 2.5 times the amount of voter participation that they have. So the communications committee's done a lot of videos and put out information. I'm trying to trickle out emails. I think that's the best we can do, really.
What about the mail going out?
Yes, there will be mail that goes out that talks about that has a list of covenants and the information for the annual meeting.
So homeowners will get U.S. mail?
Yep.
What about the newsletter? Will there be information in the newsletter about it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it wasn't in January.
Everybody needs to use a microphone. I'm getting texts from people that are watching Channel 17 saying that for the first time ever, they could not hear or know what Eddie is saying. Eddie, let this go down in history. This is the first time ever that nobody could hear you. And now Gary wants to say something. He's got a microphone.
Okay. The suggestion was made, and it has not, it is in the sausage making process, let's call it that, of putting a few signs up. Not a lot. And they would say something very neutral like, legacy needs your vote. Not vote yes, not vote no, not anything else. And we know, it has been discussed ad nauseum about signs, but how else are you going to reach the people who just don't want to see anything? You put them out by the gates where they come in and out, and then we hopefully will get people to start the discussion. What we have so far is we're climbing a mountain, and we've gotten to base camp. We haven't started up the mountain yet. And we're asking, begging you people, and your neighbors, go around and talk to people. You don't have to get in an argument. You don't have to say anything. Just ask them to please think about voting. And then ask them, if you need information, check the website, check the email, check the mail you get, check YouTube. Anything that you can. You don't have to get into a discussion. Just say that it is critical that people vote. And change happens. If they don't want to change, change happens. So please, 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 we're begging you people to go out and go through the neighborhoods and just start asking people. And we think, I think, okay, it was my idea, that of getting people to see signs. My wife and I look at our street, and there's people, our neighbor is a wonderful man. He's lived here over 20 years. He didn't know where the office was. He'd never been there. It happens. So this is the mountain that we're climbing. We're at base camp right now. Thank you.
I'm going to have to defer to Josh on that. Josh, the statement that you made before about knocking on doors is not permitted in the community. It's been, I believe, voted on and talked about before and decided by the attorney that neighbors knocking on doors is not soliciting. What was the reason that you said we couldn't do it here?
Because it is, in a sense, soliciting. If you want to go and visit your neighbor, fine. But if you're going around and knocking on their door, telling them, you know, anything about like propaganda or board business, we as an office or as a board can't really promote that.
Okay, as my membership in Neighbor to Neighbor Club, it required me visiting all of the people in the area that I am the block captain for, knocking on their doors, asking them to fill out forms, and getting their information to supply it to the club for emergencies at a later date.
Sure. Yeah, and you're a club. You can do whatever you want. You have nothing to do with the HOA.
I'll do it as a club, thank you. He's an excellent can, by the way.
Earlier, when I commented that point about soliciting, I disagreed with it, that I thought it was incorrect. Didn't want to talk about it then, but now I will. The no solicitation policy here and everywhere else was intended by the developers to let people outside the community, and that's why the signs are at entrances facing people coming into the community, no soliciting for safety reasons for our residents and to avoid nuisances by people soliciting goods and services. It has nothing to do with residents going around to other residents for communication purposes. I'm certain of this, and if there's any question about it, please, by all means, check with our attorney. I've been here since before the first board. I was here under Pringle's administration, and I was involved in the the transition there, but I wanted to mention the Neighborhood Watch. And I was the second commander for the Neighborhood Watch. Personal relationship with the Leesburg Police Chief and the county sheriff. And I discussed it with them. And they all agreed with the proposition that no soliciting is intended for the outside people, not your own residents.
That was before they knew you. Well, I think you're making it more complicated than it has to be. Bottom line is the board and the management are not going to condone you going door to door and promoting a board agenda. If you want to do it as a neighbor, go ahead. It just didn't come from me and it didn't come from them. Bottom line.
And there's nothing you can do to me either.
We'll see about that. Anybody else have any comments? All right, thank you.